The city lights were shrinking in his rearview mirror, each one a flicker of a life James had already left behind. The narrow country road stretched endlessly before him, lined with fog and silence. The luxury car that had once been his symbol of success now felt like a burden, heavy with memories of boardrooms, contracts, and quiet betrayals. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. Each breath he took felt like a small act of defiance against everything he had once believed success to be. He had walked away from it all, his career, his company, his reputation. To some, it looked like madness. To his father, it was a betrayal. But somewhere beyond those misty fields and quiet lanes was the only truth that still made sense. Deep and little NHI. He could still hear his father's voice echoing like a ghost in the back of his mind. "You're making a mistake, James. You're throwing your future away for a woman and a child that aren't even yours." The words had cut deep, but James hadn't turned back. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was reckless. But for the first time in his life, his heart, not ambition, was steering the wheel. When he arrived at the small house Deep had rented, she was outside hanging laundry under a fading sunset. The fabric fluttered gently in the breeze, and when she looked up, her smile was soft, pure, and unguarded, something no amount of wealth could buy. "James," she called out, surprise lighting up her face. "You came earlier than I thought." He stepped out of the car, his gaze lingering on her as if he hadn't seen her in years. "I came home," he said simply. For the first time, home didn't mean the family mansion, the office skyline, or the glass boardroom. It meant her. From inside, a small voice rang out like a bell. "Uncle James. Did you bring chocolate?" Little NHI came running, clutching her toy duck. He laughed, kneeling down and pulling a small bar from his pocket. "Of course I did. I could never forget you." That evening, they ate together at a simple wooden table. Just rice, vegetables, and soup, nothing fancy, nothing wasted. There were no wine glasses, no candlelight, but there was something else that filled the room: laughter. Nye's giggles bounced off the walls like music. For the first time in years, James felt peace settling quietly in his chest. Later, he stepped outside. The countryside sky was vast and close, the stars felt real again. He sat on the old wooden step, lost in thought, when Deep came out and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. "You seem quiet," she said softly. "I'm just thinking, if I did the right thing." She turned to him, her eyes calm and full of knowing. You left everything for peace, didn't you? For love? He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes. But what if I can't give you the life you deserve? Deep shook her head, her voice steady but tender. You've already given me more than money ever could, a sense of safety, of being seen, of being loved. That's worth more than anything you left behind. The wind carried her words into the night. And as he looked at her, this woman who had nothing but gave everything, James realized he hadn't lost everything. For the first time, he had found it. The next morning, Deep's voice called softly through the doorway. Breakfast is ready. The smell of warm porridge filled the room. On the table were pickled vegetables and a small plate of eggs. It was simple, but the sight brought an unexpected smile to his face. As they ate, NHI looked up with innocent eyes. Uncle James, are you going to work today? The question hung in the air. He froze, the spoon halfway to his mouth. He had no office, no title, no boardroom. Only uncertainty. Deep sensed it and replied gently, he'll work here today. We've got a lot to do in the garden. He looked at her and nodded in quiet gratitude. Even in loss, she found meaning. Under the soft morning sun, the garden stretched behind the small house, green, hopeful, alive. James rolled up his sleeves and began helping Deep fix the wooden fence. The same hands that once signed million-dollar contracts were now calloused and blistered, learning to hold a hammer instead of a pen. Each nail he drove into the wood felt like redemption. Deep teased, you're learning fast. James laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. I used to build empires, he said, but I never built a fence. Maybe this fence will last longer than your empire, she said softly, and for a fleeting second, he believed her. Weeks passed. The farm grew, rows of corn, beans, and sweet potatoes. The days were long, but Nee's laughter made them feel lighter. Yet reality was cruel. The first harvest failed. Buyers in the nearby town offered prices too low to live on. One night, James sat silently on the porch, his shoulders slumped in exhaustion. Deep brought 2 cups of tea. You're tired, she said. He nodded. I thought leaving everything behind would bring peace. But sometimes, I wonder if I've made the biggest mistake of my life. Deep placed her hand on his. Mistakes are when you give up, James. You haven't given up yet. Her words found a place deep in his heart. Behind them, Nee's laughter echoed from the small window. It was faint, but it filled the darkness. Maybe he hadn't lost the world. Maybe he'd gained something far more fragile, and far more lasting. Autumn came quietly. The fields that once promised abundance now stood broken after days of relentless rain. The crops rotted, the soil drowned. James stood in the mud, staring at the ruins of his work. The man who once led hundreds now looked like a defeated farmer. From the doorway, Diep watched him. She knew that look, it was the same one he had the day his father disowned him. She walked to him, her steps soft in the wet soil. "Don't stay out here too long," she said. "You'll catch a cold." He didn't answer. His voice was tight. All of it, gone. Months of work, gone in 3 days. "We can start again," she said gently. "You say that like it's easy," he snapped. "I gave up everything, my name, my future, and I can't even feed us properly." Her eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. "You didn't give up your future, James. You chose a different one." He turned away, anger and shame mixing inside him. "A future where I can't provide for you. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I made a huge mistake." Diep stepped closer, pressing her palms against his chest. "No, James. The mistake would have been staying in that world that broke you. The mistake would have been choosing money over love." The rain began to fall again, soft, forgiving. Inside, Nyi's laughter and the bark of their new puppy carried warmth through the house. James exhaled slowly. "You always know what to say." "I just know what's true," she replied quietly. At the market days later, an old farmer approached him. "You're that man from the city, right? The one who ran those big companies?" James hesitated, then nodded. The farmer smiled, handing him a small bundle of seedlings. "Start again. The earth doesn't care how rich you were. Only how much heart you give it." James took them silently, humbled. That night, he brought the seedlings home. Diep was sitting on the porch, telling NHI stories about the moon. When he showed her the small bundle, her face lit up. "See," she whispered. "Every ending can be a beginning." He knelt beside her, watching NHI fall asleep in her lap. "I'm starting to believe that," he said softly. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt like a man rebuilding, not his wealth, but his purpose. Winter arrived like a test of faith. The winds howled through the cracks in their wooden house, but inside, there was warmth, a quiet, invisible fire that came from love, not luxury. James rose before dawn every day. He worked the frozen fields, helped the neighbors, and repaired fences for a few coins. His hands, once smooth and idle, were now rough and strong. Each evening, Diep waited by the window, sewing a tiny jacket for NHI. One night, James came in, his clothes damp with snow. He placed an envelope on the table. "What's that?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "The first payment from the greenhouse project." "We sold our first batch of vegetables today." Her eyes widened. "James, you did it." "We did it," he corrected, reaching for her hand. In that silence, something unspoken filled the room, a peace that only comes after the storm has passed. Spring returned. The greenhouse bloomed with life. The villagers who once mocked him now came seeking his advice. Slowly, quietly, life began to change. One evening, Deep found him on the porch, Nhi asleep in his arms, the golden light painting their faces. "I used to be afraid," she said softly. "Afraid you'd regret leaving everything behind." He looked down at Nhi and brushed a lock of hair from her cheek. "I did once," he admitted. "But now, I see what I would have lost if I hadn't left. I would have lost this, you, her, the kind of life that can't be bought." Deep smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then maybe you didn't make a mistake after all." James smiled faintly as the wind softened around them. The stars above shimmered like witnesses of their quiet victory, a victory not over the world, but over fear, pride, and doubt. "You always wanted to build something that would last forever," Deep murmured. "Yes," James said, looking at her. "You already have," she whispered. "It's us." And in that moment, beneath a sky full of stars, James realized he hadn't given up everything. He had simply learned what everything truly meant.